recording this. Yes. Okay, good. Okay, so back to sharing the screen. Okay. I have the coat back from the fitting. My model is a little bit camera shy. There really weren't that many adjustments. She needed extra at the hip, tapering to nothing at the waist. So I'm going to be giving her 2 inches around the hip. I won't give her any in the center back. I don't want it to wing out in the back. But the lengths that I adjusted worked out really well. Now, something that I know may not need repeating, but I'm going to say, as you can see here, you fit it with the shoulder pads that you intend to use in it. That way you can ensure that you're going to get a proper sleeve length. Otherwise, if you put the sleeve, if you set the sleeve length and then you put the shoulder pad in, it could be a little bit too short. So you can see here, I have marked the center front. And I will turn this over now and show you the adjustments that are needed on the back. As you can see, there is the center back seam. And I took a 1/2 inch out either side, and I'm going to take that 1/2 inch up parallel along the center back of the collar. This did 2 things for her. It actually accommodated for a little bit of roundness at the upper back. It also made the shoulders fit her better because the shoulders for her were a little bit too wide. So now I will show you the adjusted pattern, and then we will go and look at the rest of the pieces that we will have to adjust after we've adjusted the main pattern. So here we have.
So Kenneth,
yes, you can see. Yes.
Can we go back to when you made the adjustment in the back of the body?
Yeah. Yes.
Would you repeat what adjustment you made to the collar?
Okay, what we did, we're taking the collar up parallel. You know, it turns out that it is a 1/2 inch between the original center front and where we want this seam to be. And so then what I'll do, and you'll see it when I mark it on the pattern, because I'm going to take these adjustments back to the paper. This would just be a parallel, straight up, parallel to the center back seam on the collar.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Other questions?
And Kenneth, what was that doing then for the shoulder area again by making that adjustment?
Well, the shoulder was a little too wide for her because she is petite and she has rather narrow shoulders. And so it pulled the shoulder, it made the neck sit closer to the base of her neck, which is what I wanted. And it pulled the shoulders themselves closer together. So it just made it sit a little better on her shoulders. It was a little too wide for her.
Thank you.
Okay, and so you'll see all these alterations back to the paper. It also made the shoulders fit her better because the shoulders for her were a little bit too wide. So now I will show you the adjusted pattern, and then we will go and look at the rest of the pieces that we will have to adjust after we've adjusted the main pattern. So here we have the front and the back, and you can see here that I have adjusted the hips out. I decided to give her 3/4 of an inch. If it's a little bit too much, we can always fit that out when we try the finished garment on her. So I have adjusted the side panels. Next, I want to adjust the center back and the collar. You can see here, I've taken this off 5/8 to the neck seam and then tapered it down to where the crosswise mark is on the center back. So they're fairly straightforward and easy alterations. Next, I want to adjust the pattern. I will go off camera and adjust the pattern, bring it back, and outline what I've done. I find it's really helpful to alter all of the pieces relating to one side first, and go on from the other. So what I started here is, this is the back piece. What I did, as you can see, is I marked out the stitching lines on the size that I'm going to be using. And the first thing I did was adjust the length. If you adjust the length, that's going to help. Then I like to work from top down. So I joined all, this is the back neck facing, this is the back lining, and I made the adjustment at the center back at the neck. And I didn't really add or subtract anything over here. This is going to be a pleat, it'll just take care of itself. But I took off the 5/8 of an inch at the center back. And here, as you can see, I folded out the length that I needed to fold out, and then working down the pattern, you can see at the hips, I added out the extra circumference at the hips so she would have enough room. Now, this is why you don't cut out all of the pattern pieces right on the cutting lines, because having extra paper around the pattern will make these alterations so much easier. So our back pieces are finished. Now, we'll go on to the fronts. Next, I'm adjusting the fronts. So what you can see here is, first thing you take care of is the length. So that is what I did on both the facing and the lining front. Then on the lining front, what I've done here, you probably can see this, is I've lined up all the cut edges so that I can just read through, and you can see here, that is the adjustment for the hips, read through from the body onto the lining. Doing this in a methodical fashion is going to make it so that you don't forget a piece. So next, we will deal with the collar. Now with the collar, as you can see, what we brought in here at the center back seam on the under collar, we're going to bring the same amount here for the upper collar, and that will be then cut on the fold. Now that we have the main bodice pieces done, let's look at the sleeves. And finally here, you can see that since we had to lengthen the sleeve on the body, we have to lengthen the sleeve on the lining. Now, just a little bit of information that's useful. If you want to find the elbow on a sleeve, the elbow is generally 10 inches up from the cuff. So that is the guide that I used on this particular pattern to find out where to lengthen the sleeve on the body and on the lining. The other pieces, obviously, we don't really have to adjust. Pocket pieces are pocket pieces, and the welt piece is the welt piece. So we have all of our pieces ready. Now, the next step, cutting. Okay, so let me stop here. Yes, so questions?
Kenneth, what about a forward shoulder adjustment on a raglan?
That is
Another class?
well, no, actually what I would say is, when you put on the raglan, what's going to happen is you're going to kind of bring the seam forward on the front, but let the seam out on the back.
Yeah.
And so have you read my fitting book or any of the articles I do on fitting?
No, I haven't.
Shame on you. Well, anyway.
I know.
Well, so what you're going to be doing, what I would look at is, see if it's going to be making a drag line this way. And, my sense is you would just have to let it out on the back and not necessarily take it in on the front.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. See, the beauty of a raglan sleeve is it doesn't fit as specifically as a set-in sleeve. So you can kind of finesse it by letting the back sleeve out.
That's what I was wondering. And then I was wondering if you played a little bit with shoulder pad placement.
Absolutely. You could, and what I would do is you could even do this in the muslin if you want to, is just kind of, because generally I center the shoulder pad on that seam,
Yeah.
but you have a little wiggle room in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So other questions, comments, thoughts, hopes, fears, dreams, desires? Yes. Okay. So now I think it's really instructive. You know, this is sort of the sidebar before we actually get to the cutting, is how we generate those pieces. Because what I'd like to do is show you how I generate the pieces, and then how we, how we cut everything out. If we run over a little bit today, I'm not going to jump up and down over it because I have nowhere else I have to be. And it'll be recorded. So I'm going to do the sidebar on this is how we generate the pieces. And then from there, I'm going to go into this is what we cut out of this, and this is what we cut out of this. So cutting and marking. So, if you have because you all have an office hour. So, we can do an office hour on getting the muslin right and all of that. And so if you're ready to cut out, why not? It's good to know kind of what to cut out and what to hold back. Okay, so questions? Okay, so let me just share the screen. Pattern pieces. Okay.
Wait, Kenneth, I forgot I have a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead. Yes.
So when, normally what I would do is when I look at the bust, when I'm looking at measurements, I look at not my full bust, but my high bust.
Yes.
Do I do that here as well?
Absolutely. You see, one of the things that I have learned over time is that you want the upper, you fit at the shoulders and up here first. And then if you need to add circumference below that, it's because the garment does sit on the shoulders. That's the foundation of the building. So having all of this fit well and then adding below is really the way to go. And so you could add, because this is, it's kind of a straight up and down coat. You could add a princess line there if you wanted to. You could actually do, like a full bust adjustment and have a side dart. I've seen the side dart on a lot of these, when I fit it. And the easiest way really, let's see if I can do this kind of standing in front of the camera. What I've done in situations where it'll show up as a drag line coming diagonally. So what I like to do in those cases is take the seam out right to the underarm. And then you're going to pick up, it's going to tell you how much it wants. And then the gap below, like if you put the two seams together, the amount that the two mismatch, from the front and the back, you just add below at the front. And so that is how I've seen, and you might want to just look at it and see if the seam does still read straight up and down. You may have to shift it a little bit forward, but that is for like to going with the first muslin. That is how I approach fitting this for gals who have a little more of a shelf. But yes, you're absolutely right to fit it to the top of the torso, because otherwise, the shoulders are down here and it just doesn't work.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
That's helpful.
Okay, so other questions? Okay, so let's go back to, let's see, Raglan coat, pattern pieces. Okay, pattern pieces. So, okay. Sometimes if you have major alterations on a pattern, it's far easier to generate new pieces rather than trying to alter the pattern pieces that arrived with the pattern. So I will outline how to do this because really it is just formula. So what I've done here is I've reduced the pattern down. I've taken off all the seam allowances and hem allowances. So this is the center front. This is the center back seam. Here are the two sleeve pieces, and this is the undercollar. So you'll see on the pattern, there are some reference lines here. These will make a little more sense in a moment. It's customary when you start altering, you alter your pattern pieces, that the facings, the linings, all of the other pieces are just formula. So here we have the four pieces. Bring the pieces in, well, the 5 with the collar. Bring the body and sleeve pieces in. I've separated them out. Here, this is the front. Here we have the pieces. Now, when you're drafting the facings and the linings, you want to mark some lines on your main body pieces. The main body is the master. Then you trace everything off from there. So what I've done, if I overlap these like so, what I've done is the facing is about 2.5 inches down from the neck at the shoulder. And this depth here is 4 or 5 inches, depending. A deeper facing is a little more luxurious. So what I'm doing here, I would attach these 2 pieces. Do the backs in just a moment. So when you attach these 2 pieces, this piece here is going to be traced off as the front facing. That would be this piece here. And then we can take off this piece, and then this section here, that turns into the lining. So from the main body, we're going to be drafting the front facing and the front lining. Now, put these aside, put the 2 backs together so we can see what we're doing here. So here is the back and the back sleeve. So again, what we will do, so again, it's commonplace, measure 2.5 down from the shoulder and 3.5 down at the center back. So we would generate 2 pieces from this. We trace all of this off, and that yields our back neck facing. So you don't have a seam there. You can make a notch there if you wish, all good. So then we set the sleeves aside, and we generate, by copying from here, down, over, and up, we generate the back lining. Now, there will be more to these in just a moment. I'll set this aside. So then what we want to do is we're going to come in here with the 2 sleeves, and we join them together. Because on the sleeve, you don't really need a seam. So this, because we've lost these 2 pieces, because this goes to the back neck facing, this goes to the front facing, those are cut away. And this then is our sleeve. Next, modifications to the different facing pieces. Let's start with the front. Now on the front, on the lining, we're going to raise by 3/4 inch. We, again, have no seam allowances on here. So we raise by 3/4 inch, and then we add the hem allowance. So this here, that's the hem. Other than that, you would just add your seam allowances, front lining. And label your pieces like you're going to be stricken with amnesia at any moment. Now, here on the facing, the break is roughly here. So there's some favoring. Now I'm just going to exaggerate this for the camera. But what we're going to do, because the lapel turns back, we're going to add 1/8 of an inch here and 1/8 of an inch here, tapering to 0. So that's above, so that the when you fold this back, the seam will favor underneath. So below, we're going to
Yes.
subtract.
Yes, question.
This is Michelle. Quick question.
Uh-huh.
What is that break point marked, or about how far down is that?
It's the top button.
Okay, and is that marked on the pattern?
It is, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. So is everyone with me so far on this? You see how you generate all the different pieces from the main body, and then these little tweaks and little tweaks and things are going to turn them into the different faces, the pieces that will fit onto this pattern. Does this all make sense?
This is Michelle again. Can I ask one more question?
Sure, please
Your-
do.
The original information that I had from you talked about a 2-inch hem. Do you prefer 1.5 inches?
I
or-
do. Let's go with 1.5 inches on that.
Because,
It's just that's actually how the pattern is set up. There was an error in the 2-inch hem.
okay, thank you.
Okay, so other questions? Don't be shy.
So just to clarify, you are doing this if you have had to make significant changes, alterations to the coat pattern.
Yes, that's
in your,
correct.
In your client's coat, you just made the changes to the pattern pieces because they were relatively simple. Is
That's
that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So, also just this is just me kind of going into my deep dive of being a nerd. Because there are people who say, oh, there's all this mystery surrounding how to generate lining and facing pieces and all of that. It's really all formula. It will work for this coat. It will work pretty much for any coat you have. So, there are times I've had people say, okay, how do I generate a lining for an unlined coat? This is the method.
I'm finding it interesting. I'm enjoying it, but I just wanted to clarify that if you're not doing a lot of it, I will probably be in this camp here, but
Yeah.
I just want to clarify, if you don't need to make a lot of adjustments, then you can just do it straight off the pattern.
Absolutely. Yes, that's correct. Okay. So other questions? Okay.
I have a question. It's
Yeah.
Rebecca.
Yeah.
If you wanted to add a flannel piece in between the lining and the fashion fabric because you wanted your coat warmer,
Okay. How I would handle that is I would interline the lining with the flannel.
okay.
It's sort of like they do with fur coats. If you've ever looked inside fur coats, especially short-haired fur coats that are not that warm, they generally will interline the lining with either like wool flannel, or there is this fabric called lamb's wool, which is a loosely woven lamb. It's loosely woven that really captures warmth. So that is far easier than trying to interline the entire outside of the coat.
Okay. And then do you handle the hem the same way, the drop hem with
Yes.
okay.
Because see, when you interline, this is something, because debates rage, but I'm of the school of thought that when you interline, when you base the two together, they technically are one piece of fabric. You treat them like one piece of fabric. You would hem it the same way as if it were just a lining. The seam finishes are pretty much the same. It's just that you have 2 layers of fabric.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So
So this is Sherry. A quick question on interlining.
yes.
Susan Kalji is a big fan of interlining
Yes.
almost everything except blouses. So what's your thought on interlining coats?
Okay, well, generally, one moment, please. Generally, interlining a coat, if it's like a litten tweed or something like that, I absolutely would, because it's such the fabric doesn't really have a lot of body on its own. I tend not to interline coats because the coat fabric has, I think, enough heft to it that it can stand on its own. I am on, I don't know how this happened, but I am on the Republican National Committee's call list. And so about this time every day, I get a call from them. It's very strange. Okay, so other questions?
I have one question, Kenneth. This is Michelle again.
Yeah.
You mentioned the lamb's wool.
Yes.
Do you know a source for that? Because we haven't been able to find it for years.
You know, I wish I knew. You know, the closest I would go with, every now and then I'll see a fashion fabric that's like a loosely woven wool mohair blend.
Uh-huh.
Then, you know, that I would use, but you know, depending on where you get it,
Yeah.
you're going to pay some money for it.
Yeah.
So
We've just gone with a really lightweight flannel.
yeah, well, that works quite well. You know,
Mhm.
you just the thing though is, you know, if you really want the coat to be warm, I interline the lining. That is far easier to manage than trying to interline the entire coat. Because if you're interlining the entire coat, you know, the seam allowances at the center front and the folds, the hem allowances, everything end up getting way too thick.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So other questions? Okay. So back to the story. 1/8 of an inch. Taper to nothing there. And here, subtract 1/8 of an inch at the bottom. Now, that's not the entire story. This is technically correct, but what I find is where the facing joins the lining, sometimes you get a pull right there. So this is an old trick that I learned years ago. You drop down 1/4 of an inch. I'm exaggerating this a little bit. That gives you a little bit of play. If you don't need it, all good. So these are the modifications that you do for the front pieces. Facing front. Center. On the lining, we shorten by 3/4 of an inch. Then we add the hem allowance of 1 1/2 inch. On the facing, above the break, you add 1/8 of an inch to here, blending into the curve, and below the break, you remove 1/8 of an inch parallel over to here, and then drop 1/4 of an inch to change the angle of this line down here. You would add your seam allowances from there. You got your pattern piece.
Kenneth, one more quick question. This is Michelle.
Yeah.
Are you then adding is there a hem allowance on that front facing, or is there just a seam allowance on that?
Just a seam allowance on the front facing.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so you would add your hem allowance up to the facing on your coat front.
Yep.
And you would add your hem allowance on your backs as well.
Yep. Okay.
It's
Thank
just
you.
a seam allowance on the facing.
Okay.
On the hem, you're going to raise 3/4 of an inch, and then add 1 1/2 inch hem. Up here at the center back, you want to create a pleat. And so you bring this out, inch to 1.25 inches. And then this, I could have done that better, but okay. This then blends down roughly to the waist. This gives you a little extra across the shoulder blade.
So when you install the lining, you'll overlap at the center back. So you have a notch at the center back, and that's your lining. So on your facing, I just, at the shoulder on the facing, I subtract 1/8 of an inch, just because it's on the inside of the curve. And that's the center back, fold, facing, lining back. So from here, again, you would add your 1/2 inch seam allowances all around, 1/2 inch seam allowances around here. Voila, you have your back pieces. Now we go to the sleeve lining. So the sleeve lining, all you need to do is raise 3/4 and then add the hem allowance. One and a 1/2 inch hem. And there you have it. You could, if you wanted to, you could make this dart a little shorter. Doesn't hurt. But other than that, and I like to mark front, sleeve lining. So there you have it. This is how, if you've made a lot of serious alterations on your pattern, to generate new corollary pieces, I call them, because sometimes it's just easier to start fresh and make new pattern pieces than to try to alter what you have changed. The collar pieces are fairly straightforward. You copy out your under collar pattern to create your upper collar pattern. And as you can see here, the center back will be on the fold. And then what I like to do is add 1/8 of an inch around. Let's add 1/8 of an inch here, there, tapering to 0 there. I also like to add here, add 1/4 of an inch. That then tapers to 0 here. What this is for is that when the outer collar goes around the neck, you need a little extra length, otherwise you're going to create a bind. So that 1/4 of an inch at the center back does your trick. And then at the neck, we add 1/4 of an inch turn of cloth, and that then tapers to nothing at this point here. So this here, that is going to be your new center front, or center back, sorry. So here, there you have the under collar and the upper collar. You would add your seam allowances to all of this, make sure you mark everything, you're all good. So as you can see, sometimes it's far easier to generate new pattern pieces rather than altering the existing ones. Okay, so questions?
That's really well done, Kenneth. Thank you. I mean, that's really
You know,
well done.
I sort of apologize for the lack of sophisticated graphics on this, because I'm kind of doing this on, with my iPhone and, pens and Sharpies and all. But, you know, I just, it's good to know how to do this so that like in the future, if you have another coat that you want to line, or if you have to make major alterations, then you're not kind of going, oh God, how do I fix all these pattern pieces? Because I have found, you know, see, I don't, as a rule, sew with commercial patterns. One of the reasons I trained for those who, yeah, I know you all know where I'm kind of where I come from, but just my pattern making, I studied with a woman named Simone Sethna in San Francisco, and she trained at the École Guerlain in Paris. And she really, all of my pattern making skills, I kind of understood what was going on, but she's the one I regard it as my master's degree. And so if you know, that whole thing, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. This is one of those things. If you understand kind of what's behind it, you can extrapolate, and it gives you information to do other things. So I just, you know, this is something to, you know. So yeah, so my lack of graphic sophistication in iMovie is what it is. So there you have it. So questions?
So does your grain line on your collar piece change when you
Yes,
scooch out that?
when you scooch that out, that is your new center back cut on the fold on the grain line.
Okay, so that's your new grain line.
Yeah, because you see, this is one of those things that you don't hear discussed much. It's called turn of cloth.
Yeah.
We all kind of know what it is. We, you know, some people don't know what it's called, but the general rule is turn of cloth is 1/4 of an inch. You know, when you have two pieces that fold, you need extra on the top layer to get up and over everything. And on this coat, when we get to the collar, you're going to see that if it's a thick coat, you could go 3/8 or 1/2 inch as opposed to 1/4 of an inch, because the thickness of the fabric sometimes absorbs the turn of cloth. And so, you know, it's good to be aware of these things, because a lot of times, you know, and this is again another reason I don't use commercial patterns is I look at how some of them are drafted and they don't factor in those things. So it's good to know, you know, because there are some people who say, well, I made up this pattern and the collar wings up and it's me. And like, well, no, it's because the collar was cut incorrectly. You know, it's just good to know that there, you know, this is why, you know, if you have points that turn up or if the back of the collar rolls up, that's because the upper collar and the under collar were probably generated from the same pattern piece. So the turn of cloth was not built in. And Simone was very strict about, you build everything into the pattern, because she said, you don't assume that you're going to be the one sewing the pattern. So you build it in so that the person who sews it, all they have to do is just do their job. And all of that stuff is factored into the pattern. The other thing is label everything as if you're going to be stricken with amnesia at any moment. Truly. You know, this is something students at FIT, I'm pounding into their heads a lot, like, gotta do it, you gotta label it. So yeah, it's just good practices. So questions?
I just wanted to comment. I
Yeah.
thought your directions were very clear. It doesn't matter that you didn't have sophisticated equipment. It was right on target, very easy to follow.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. You're very kind to say that. Okay, so we have like it's like 15 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and play the video on once you have your pattern to cut it out, because, you know, I mean, if you're ready to do that, you might as well, so that you can be ready for next week. So let me go in and computers. You know, I really for years just resisted the computer thing, because I really, you know, here we are. So let me just put that away. So now let me share the screen again. So yeah, this is cutting and marking, because it's good to see it. Cutting out the lining is fairly straightforward, and I generally like to cut the lining out first. What you have here is the center back piece and the front. You can see I'm cutting it out of a rather busy paisley. Now I'm using this rather busy paisley so I don't have to worry about matching a pattern, because matching a pattern on a raglan sleeve is a bit of a challenge.
So I will cut these two pieces here, then lay out the sleeve and cut that. And now you can see I have the sleeve linings laid out. I will go off camera and cut those out, and you'll get to see the results. Now, before I continue, I would like to talk a moment about the cutting tools. I have the rotary cutter. I also have my Geiger shears. I like to spread my cutting out between the two. I don't use the shears or the rotary cutter exclusively. This way, I feel that you can avoid any repetitive stress injuries in your sewing. I think this is a really good consideration at this point. So be kind to your hands. Have multiple ways of cutting. This is the lining for the cuff latch. Now on the cuff latch, you either cut it along the grain or you cut it across the grain. That is up to you. I'll talk about that when we cut the one in face fabric. But I like to cut the lining on the bias. I find it's far easier to turn this right side out when you cut the lining on the bias. And this is the pocket bag. You could cut it out of the lining fabric. You could cut it out of pocketing. But we cut two of these because front and back, the way we set the welt pockets, this will create one whole pocket. So the straight grain is right here. And I will cut this out with my rotary cutter. Now on to marking. The first thing I want to mark is the shoulder dart on the lining sleeve. This is a pretty straightforward thing to do. You just use your tracing carbon and your tracing wheel. Now, debates rage about using the tracing carbon. Some people try to slip it between the layers, have the right sides out. I like the right sides together, so it's far easier to have one laying on the table facing up. Then you have the two layers of fabric. You have the carbon facing down, and then the pattern on top. And that is the easy way to go. Now, another little marking thing here. This is what's called a dual tracing wheel. It's metric. We're not going to be using it for this, but they adjust, as you can see. You can adjust the widths. And then you put one finger here, one finger here. So you can have one tracing wheel on the stitching line, and then the other one will make the cutting line. Now, if you want to use one, don't just take this off and set it aside because it will end up in the trash and you don't want to lose it. I just turn them like so. Now, my students, sometimes when they're shipped like this. So the students ask, okay, what's up with that? And I have to tell them, okay, you take them out and you turn them. So yes, now I like the ones with the blunt ribs as opposed to the needles. Doesn't damage the fabric so much. The shoulder, this is where we just come in with the scissors and make any snips that we need to make. Allowances. And that's marking the sleeve. The only thing really to mark on the front is snips at the armhole. You can also mark a snip on the side to match it up. And I just will make a snip here where I fold it so you can match this up to the back. The front is ready to go. Here is the lining back. So make one snip at the center back, and we make two snips. As a rule, two snips are on the back, one snip is on the front. one mark here, and one mark here. So there you have it. These are the back pieces. We just want to know where this fold line is on the pocket. So it's a simple matter of 2 snips. Fairly easy. And the lining on the cuff latch, don't really need any marks. That will take care of itself. We have all of the marking and cutting done for the lining. Next will be the face fabric. This is the fabric.
Question.
Yes.
That I'm going
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you cut them out with the 1/2-inch seam allowance?
Well, yes, the seam allowance is built into the pattern.
It is. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
you don't have to add that separately. That's actually a very good question. Glad you asked that.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Okay, moving right along.
for the demonstrator coat. This is a boucle. As you can see, it has a little metallic in it. So it's kind of pretty. But what you notice is that I have block fused it on the back. Now, this is not absolutely necessary, but what I wanted to do is to block fuse it so that you could tell the right side from the wrong side during the videos. So what I have done here is I have laid everything out. This is 3.5 yards of fabric at 54 inches wide. You notice I've got a little bit left over, which is better, just in case you have a boo-boo. So let me unfold this and I'll show you the layout. What you see here, there's one of the sleeves.
Sorry, I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
What did you use for the block fusing? Did you use a tree coat, fusible tree coat?
Well, this is called a fusible weft, but I actually send it. There's a place called MK Cutting here in New York City. I just take it to them and have them block fuse it.
Okay, and it was a weft, fusible weft.
Fusible weft, yeah. And so, you know, if you're in, you know, because you're in the New York area as I remember it. So
Yeah.
it's on 36th Street near, I want to say 8th Avenue. And, you know, you take it in, and to have the 3.5 yards block fused, I think was $27.
Oh,
You know, because they provide the fusible, they run it through the machine. I find it's a lot easier than trying to wrangle an entire piece of fabric to block fuse it yourself.
now did you do this because it's a boucle?
Well, no, I did it really really just for the class so that you could clearly see the back of the
Okay.
fabric and the front of the fabric. So it's not absolutely necessary.
Okay,
But for this example, I just felt that, you know, for clarity's sake, it was going to help us to see which was the right side and which was the wrong side.
right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions? Okay, so
Is the back. I'm orienting everything in one direction. This fabric, I'm not really sure whether it has a nap or not, but I've decided to orient everything in the same direction just so that there is no change of the surface texture when the garment is being worn. This is what's called a nap layout. The other option would be what's called a nested layout, where you turn all the pieces so that you can get a higher yield. That works for solid fabrics and tweeds and such, but for this particular fabric, I've decided to go with a nap layout. And here are the rest of the pieces. You have the under collar piece cut on the bias. You have the upper collar cut center back on fold. This is the body front. This is the facing for the front. And then down here, I'm actually going to turn this. This is going to be the back neck facing. So these are the pieces that you cut from your face fabric. I will cut these out, and then we will cover some marking. And one final piece. This is the cuff latch, and if you remember, we cut it on the bias in the lining. The straight of grain here, you could run it straight of grain, but I've decided to run it cross grain so that when it lays onto the sleeve, the texture will be the same. From here, we have our pieces of the face fabric. Next, we want to cut the tailoring canvas and the muslin. And finally, we cut the undercollar out of a thin muslin and out of the tailoring canvas. I will go off camera, cut these two out, and bring you back the results. So here we are. We have the undercollar cut from the face fabric, the muslin, and now the canvas. As you can see, save this out with the pocket welt guide. You don't have to cut this out just yet, but keep these two together because you will need those later. All of our cutting is done.
Okay, so I think I'm going to stop it here and we can begin marking next week. But so questions, thoughts, comments, requests for me?
So our homework is
you're
to
gonna
get
put
ready to
this-
cut fashion fabric.
Yeah, this will all be, you know, you'll get links on this. You know, yeah. So yeah. So, you know, actually, if you just get your fitting and your pattern work done by next week,
Okay.
we would still be in good shape because, you know, there's cutting, there's marking, and then I'm going to go into the different, because I construct the coat. I tend to construct it in different pieces and different sections. And so I think the collar is the next one. I'd have to look at the list. Then, you know, making the cuff latches is the next. Then there's the collar. Then there's the making of the welts. Then there's the installing of the welts, because the making of the welts is one whole thing. The installing of the welts is one whole thing. It's really the welt pockets. If the welt pockets look wonky, then the entire coat's going to look wonky. So, you know, I do a kind of a deep dive on that. So, so yeah, if you get your pattern work done, get your all of that done, and get everything cut out by next time, I think we would be in good shape.
When you say cut out, you mean you want all the fashion fabric and everything cut?
Well, you know, because see, this is where the office hour will probably come in handy. So, you know, if you really want me to kind of cast my eye over the muslin before you actually commit, that would be a good thing. So really the big thing is, let's get this pattern fitted, you know, and if you're feeling confident that yes, it all fits nicely, yeah, you can start cutting it out. But I'm not going to go like, come on, start cutting it out, because I want this to be a successful project. And so, you know, if you want me to look at the muslin, I can make tweaks and all that. All good. Because this is not a race. We'll get this done in the 8-week period.
Kenneth, as far as coat length, I'm just 5'2".
Mhm.
So can this be fingertip length, or is it supposed to be a little longer?
It should be a little longer because of the welt pockets.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and
So where am I?
Well, you see, this is one of those things when you make your muslin. These are, you know, because that's,
Yeah. Okay.
you know, the gal that I am making this for, she's very petite. She's probably comes up to my shoulders.
Oh,
And so what I looked at with her, you know, and her measurements from the waist to the base of the neck, I could tell that, oh, I need to pick this up. And so that then raised the pockets somewhat. So you can look at this in the mirror and decide, okay, where those pockets are and then how far down. It doesn't have to be exactly the length that is in the pattern.
okay.
If you want it to be a little shorter based on your figure, that's entirely up to you. But that's why we make the muslin.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very good.
Other questions?
So process on booking the office hour with you for fitting.
Well, just email me because I'll do it all on Zoom. So, you know, if you email me, I can set up an appointment. Now, like mornings work better for me. Like, well, let's see now, Wednesday, Thursday afternoon, evening, I'm teaching at FIT.
Okay.
So like, but I can do weekends. I'm pretty flexible on that. Yeah, you know, so yeah, we can email back and forth and kind of figure out, okay, when can we slot the time in for this? Because I just, you know, I would like to cast my eye on your muslins before you actually cut. I just think that's a good. I want them all to be successful coats. So
Well, they're all going to be Kenneth King coats, so they're supposed to look.
Yes.
so that's why I want to cast my eye over them. So yeah, so just email me, and we can kind of arrange what the timing on this.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
Kenneth. It's nice to be in your class again.
Well, thank you. So
Yes, it's always wonderful to engage with you.
well, I have to
Always.
say,
Thank you.
I was telling my husband that because I have the Wednesday night embellishment class, and this is so much different than FIT, because see, we cannot compel the students to turn on their cameras. Like, okay, there's, I guess, some sort of regulations. Fine, that's the way it is. And so there may be one or two in the entire class who will like turn on their cameras. And so what I have to do now is I'll just call on people. Okay, so-and-so, let me see your homework. So-and-so, let me see your homework. And there's always that one that they're somewhere else, and they just so so it's nice to actually see lively people asking questions, interacting. It's good. Yes.
Great.
Okay, great, thank you.
So
Extremely well done, Kenneth. Thank you.
Yes.
thank you. Like I said, graphically it's not very
No,
good.
it's perfect.
Well,
It's very understandable.
well, one of my comments at my students at FI, because see, I have all of my class videos on YouTube. They live on an unlisted channel.
Okay.
So I would ask you, don't share these links.
Okay.
And I tell my students, you can use it, but don't share the links. And I had a student ask me if she could share some of my links with her millinery professor. And I said, well, why? And apparently, and oh, this sounds like no end of torture. This professor drags the computer around to the pressing table, and then drags the computer around to, and it's like they have to sit for 4 hours and watch this. I'm like, oh, that sounds painful. But I said, I would rather you not, because I've had the good fortune of having to do video, even like way back in the days of Sewing Today. So I have a little sense of how it works. And especially Judy Newcomb at Threads. The best thing I ever learned from anyone was her. And she said, they don't need to see your face. They don't want to see your face. They want to see your hands. They want to see what's going on. And, the iPhone makes it so that I can, it's like what I'm seeing is what the student sees. So, so the production values aren't great. And sometimes you hear the sirens outside, and sometimes you hear the radiator hissing, but okay, it's what I have. So there you have it.
That's reality. This is the way it is.
Yeah. Okay, so I will download the recording, and then I will send you all an email with the links to these and the recording from today's class. And then email me to set up your office hours so we can kind of slot that in so I can get you all situated.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. It was great today.
See ya, bye.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Bye now.
Bye, Kenneth.
Bye.
Have a good day.
You too.